as the first time. Um, Maybe a little fewer goosebumps by the third time, but it's still so impactful and at times difficult to think about what these men went through, what happened to them. Yet there's still there's a pretty strong vein of human survival and humanity that comes through in the way these men were saved by the skin of their teeth by this German Luftwaffe officer. So we'd like to get into as deep a Q&A and commentary as we can. Mike, thank you so very much for producing this film and telling this story, which is such a powerful and important story. I've got 1,000 questions, but I don't want to dominate the questioning. But I'd ask our audience to think about what they'd like to ask or what they'd like to comment on. And I'll just start with the two questions first. One real easy one. I didn't notice until this time that they were also called the KLB Club.
Right.
What is the KLB Club?
That is the German lettering for Buchenwald, which stands for Concentration Lager Buchenwald. Concentration spelled with a K. So that's what they named their organization afterwards. And one of their members drew a kind of a logo for them, which was a winged foot, like the foot of Nike, with a chain, ball and chain around its ankle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. First time I caught that. So, it's always good to go back and watch
right.
these kind of documentaries all over again. When Rick Martini was on and having read his book, there's a couple things that occur to me that I want to ask about. And I know we talked a bit when Rick and Marilyn were on, a few months ago about the German officer who ends up saving them, Hans Trautloft, if I have that pronunciation anywhere near right. What do we know about him? How did his role come to light? What happened to him after the war?
I can answer some of that, but
Colin, you'll have to ask you to unmute.
I know Colin is involved in this as well.
Mm-hmm.
So who'd like to start?
I'll just say there was a book that came out and it just happened. It was about him and it happened to mention this as like a part of like a page of the book just mentioned, oh, and by the way, I saved these Allied airmen from this from Buchenwald. And we realized that must have been him. And he fits the description that they gave. Like someone, like a German officer out of Central Casting, this guy was. And Colin can probably fill in more details on him. But after the war, he served honorably. And he was in the military in Germany before the war started and continued, I believe, in West Germany afterwards. And then and was treated very well as far as I know.
No repercussions from the German side, former SS and Gestapo.
Sure. Not that I'm aware of, but Colin, if he can jump on, I might know more about that than I do.
Yeah, Hannes never had any recriminations. In fact, 3 of the SS officers involved who survived the war, they were not totally aware of his involvement in the Buchenwald story. Hannes never wrote it in his diary. He never kept it, never wrote anything. And during the 10 years of my interviews with him, he never mentioned it. The only person who mentioned it was his wife, Marga. And she says, "Oh, tell the boy about those Americans and people you helped." And I said, "Oh, that sounds like a good story." And I said, bitte Information, was ist das? And he goes, "Oh, guys, it was nothing. It was nothing, And so I never pursued it. Then I saw Mike's first documentary in about 2012. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, wait a minute. Let me go back to my interviews. And I went back to the interviews of Steinhoff, Gallen, Trautloft, Wolf. And I put it all together and I thought, well, let me send this to Adam Akos. Adam took the photograph of Trautloft. I gave it to him. He says, "Hey, there's a lady, Marilyn Walton, I want to meet with you." So I talked to him. I met Marilyn through him. And it all just came together. And it just, it fit. I wasn't sure if it was Hannes. I'll let the other guys decide. So.
Yeah, and we didn't know his name when the documentary first came out in 2012. We found that out. It was a mystery in the original version. And then we found this out through everyone's help in the subsequent years.
Was he still alive? When did he pass away?
He died in 95, I believe.
Okay.
So he never was, gained any recognition for this incredible act of humanity.
No, but I recommended that he be recommended for a Avad Yashem in Jerusalem, because he knew some of those guys were Jews. So, and he really going up against Heinrich Himmler, you had a better chance of playing butting heads with a freight train. But he did it anyway. He and Galland and even Goering got involved, to his credit. But he just had this apparent sense of decency about him that even I've interviewed 20 fighter pilots in the war who were under his command in the Spanish Civil War and World War II, who said that he never was very aggressive in his discipline. He was a very kind person, and I guess that was just his nature.
Wow. Thank the Lord for that man at that moment in time, for those 168 airmen. Let me bring in Rick Martini and Pat. Are you still with us? Do we need to unmute Pat? Pat Vinicombe, I think it is.
Pat, hold on one second. Just need to find her. Pat Vinicombe. Yes, I'll ask Pat to unmute. There you are, Pat.
And Rick, I think you're unmuted. No? Okay, we need to unmute Rick Martini as well.
And Rick. All right. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Thank you, Pat. Thank you for staying with us. I know it's very late in the middle of the morning.
It's 10 minutes past 2 a.m.
Well past my bedtime. Let me ask Rick to start with, then we'll come to you, Pat. Rick, I'm sure you have this film almost memorized. And by the way, I did finish your book a while ago. Any thoughts, any comments you'd like to share with the audience?
It's just a terrific production. I just every time I see it, I appreciate it more. So it's great to have it out there and available. So
let me ask you, Rick. I know when we first started talking to you, you sent me a PowerPoint that you had done, I think, in New Zealand. And I didn't know much about the whole topic so far. And I remember the first couple of slides were about this man Lamison in New Zealand. And I was a little confused. I said, oh, geez, I thought we were talking about his father, Rick Martini. And then eventually I came to understand who he was and the role he played. Tell us a little bit about him. And did you meet him while he was still alive?
No, I didn't. And I met his son afterward. But really, he was the key to the survival of these guys, because without a forceful, organized personality to hold everything together, they could very easily have fallen into clusters and been basically fending for themselves.
Yeah.
So he really deserves a huge amount of credit. I mean, my dad and others were surviving, but they survived because of the framework that Lamison created.
He certainly comes through, Mike, in your film as a very strong character man, even at, I don't know, what must he have been in the film, in his mid 80s or late 80s. He still seemed very energetic and very intellectual and thoughtful, Mike. And any comments you'd like to make about him? Oh, we need to unmute Mike. Here we go. I'll ask.
Thank you. Yeah, he was in his late 80s, I believe, when we filmed this. And one thing I noticed, both him and the French resistance fighter that helped my grandfather, who's in the film, both guys, even at that late age, very almost intimidating to be around. Like, guys, even at that age, you wouldn't want to cross them because you're not really sure which way it would go. That's just his personality type, just a leader. And I tell people if you were in corporate training, management, watch this film, because he's a lesson in leadership. He immediately knows where they are the second they step off that train onto that platform. He knows exactly where they are and what they need to do. And while everybody else is discombobulated. And yeah, he's just a natural born leader.
How old would you have been at that time in 44? Probably mid-20s.
I think he was like 24, 25. Yeah. So he would have been a little bit older. My grandfather had just turned 21 right after he was shot down. So, which is more the age that most of the guys were. So he would have been a little bit older.
It's the part of this air war that has always just amazed me, that these men were kids.
Right.
And think of myself at 24 or 25, and I know I was still more interested in what bar I could visit that night or how I moved off. And
I was an idiot at that age. I can't imagine that kind of responsibility. Yeah.
Same here. Same here. Let's bring Pat into the conversation. Pat, any
Hi.
very active in the chat. Thank you. Any comments you'd like to make?
First of all, I'm absolutely delighted to have been part of this meeting. To me, it's very special because I've lived with the shadow of Buchenwald on my family all my life. And my father has never forgotten, obviously, Phil Lamerson, whose family I keep in contact, and also the fraternity, the friendship that was unique amongst the airmen in Buchenwald. It was that knowledge that they had the military background that made them more mature. And I think the friendship was so strong because they had nothing. And that brought the men together. But once they left Buchenwald and went to Stalingrad III, that special bond of friendship was broken because the men were moved to different compounds at Stalingrad III, and they weren't supported, and people were afraid of them because they looked so bedraggled, unhealthy, and they really almost feared them, and the men were isolated, which was a great pity afterwards. And then when they did the big march to out of Stalingrad III, the men were split again and different camps, and very few of the airmen kept in touch. But when they retired, that was when they started thinking about what happened at Buchenwald. And my father had been working for British intelligence, and he had been monitoring Buchenwald during the Cold War. And he decided to risk his own security to go and revisit Buchenwald. And he was able to get all the information that proved that the men had been there. And they'd also taken photographs of the airmen in the nude. And apparently this was to try and discover whether any of the men actually had been circumcised and were Jewish. And those photographs are hidden away still at Buchenwald. And the whole story has generated a lot of myths, but I think underlying that is just perseverance and bravery. And it was a miracle. It really was.
Yeah. I think that's a very fitting word, Pat, from my limited knowledge of this that I've, it's been a pleasure to learn more about it. There's a couple of good questions in the chat, but before we get to that, let me ask Marilyn, our other POW expert here. Any particular comments, Marilyn? Oh, we got it. Let me to get to that. For some reason, I can't get to the unmute on the top row. Sean, could you?
You needed
Yeah, I've
Marilyn?
got it.
There we
Yeah,
go.
I've got it. Yes. I do know that in South Compound, Lieutenant Colonel Clark, who was a senior officer there, interrogated the men when they came in. That picture you saw of them, the group of the men, was actually a clandestine picture that was taken. And Clark had interrogated them, and he wrote down everything to try and get the word back to the US government about the concentration camps. And he sewed that interrogation paper into the lining of his leather coat. And he got to Paris when he was liberated from Moosburg. And by then, Eisenhower the word had gotten out about the camps because Eisenhower had sent the local Germans in. So, but there's still a record that I assume that is at the Air Force Academy now. So I think the other thing, when Mike Dorsey and I were working together, when he was making the first documentary, I remember towards the end, the one fact that we wanted to find out that we could not find anybody who could tell us was the name of the German that came into the camp. If you recall that, Mike, and we looked everywhere. And then Colin recommended to me to read A Higher Call, Adam Mako's book. And there it was in black and white that it was Hans Trautloft. So I called Mike Dorsey and I said, finally, and by then it was a little late, but I was so glad to see him in the second version, the longer version, that his story is told, because if it wasn't for him, a lot of these men would not be living now.
So I've read all of Adam's books, and that one, his original, obviously. I don't recall that. Why is Trautloft's name in Adam Makos's book, A Higher Call?
Because Adam knew Colin and had consulted with him, because Colin had interviewed Trautloft at one time, and the information came out that he had been in the camp. And there is a section in A Higher Call where he mentions Trautloft coming into the camp.
Okay. I'm gonna go back and read that. That fascinating.
You'll see it now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just a question here from Harry Bartlett. Harry, are you still on the program?
Yes.
Okay.
Just asked him to unmute.
There we go.
Yes, certainly am. Absolutely brilliant. I know a fair bit of the story, but I have never seen the whole thing put together, and it's a triumph to me. And it's a story that, as somebody said earlier on in the chat, it needs to be told and retold. The comment I was going to make was, I'm the chairman of the 102 Salon Squadron Association, and we had, excuse me, we had 4 members of the same crew who came down, rescued near Rouen, Lyons-la-Forêt. They were betrayed and they ended up in there. The thing that Phil Lamerson and a couple of the American guys, Chet, was it? Said about people being able to bond. And the only person I know anything of, I haven't been able to speak to any of our 4. They've all died. But Reginald Joyce, who was the last one to go, I spoke to his daughter and granddaughter, and they were so lucky that they were able to stay together as a group of 4. And Phil Lamerson encouraged the guys who knew each other in crews to do this. And I think somebody just said about the training of management. It's using that skill to bring those people together and give them the confidence. And Phil Lamerson can never be praised high enough for me and our veterans. So I just wanted to pass on that the role that he played somewhere along the line in history has been missed, and he should have received far more recognition for what he did. I know he's quite a retiring sort of guy from what I've been told, but I still think that's quite remiss that he was never given more recognition. But thank you for an absolutely brilliant evening. It's now 2:20 in the morning, and I've got to be up at just after 6. So thank you very much, and I will leave you now and let you carry on.
Harry, let me request, did you do one thing? I'd love to hear more about your association. Could you send us an email just so we have your email? The email is really easy. It's glenn@veteransbreakfastclub.org.
Glenn
with two N's at
two N's.
veteransbreakfastclub.org.
I just need my mechanical aids to seeing with. Right, so it's Glenn, two N's, at
veteransbreakfastclub.org. Just shoot me a quick one tomorrow once you recover from such a late night, and I'd love to correspond with you.
What I will do is I'll send you a printout, a story produced by a local guy from Lyons-La-Forêt who's done a lot more research into fantastically brave French woman called Huguette Verhaeghe, who hid a number of Allied airmen, American, Canadian, all of the RAF groups. I'll send that in the email with it.
Thank you.
I can't thank you enough. It's been a real pleasure to just sit here and listen to it. It's absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Thank you all.
Glenn, I just want to say, as far as recognizing men go, in 2012 at the Stalag 3 reunion, we had all four of them then. I knew Chat, Richard, Don, Joe. Unfortunately, I didn't know Easy. I would have loved to have known him, but they were like rock stars. And I should add also that Mike Dorsey, for those who don't know it, his documentary took first place in DC that year, as the Gary Sinise has a GI Film Festival every year. And the film was first place. And you can see.
And Phil Lamison did finally get some recognition in New Zealand as a result of this film, because it was licensed by one of their major networks there. Like their version of ABC or NBC here in the US was licensed and it aired there. And as a result, they realized, that I think the New Zealanders always feel a little bit second chair to the Australians when it comes to the war effort, and they're heroes. And they finally realized they had another hero they didn't know about. And as a result, he did get quite a bit of attention. And I believe he received a letter from the Queen about it. And I think he was referred to as a dear family friend or something. It was an honorarium from the royal family as a result of it. He was humble till the end. We went back and screened the film for him in Wellington. And his comment afterwards was, it was a bit long. That's just how he was. So he was a tough guy.
Very humble.
Can I just say, Mike, the position that we have always taken, and the RAF Association have always taken, is that we've pressed and pressed and pressed to try and get him recognised officially. He doesn't have to have an honorary knighthood because they're in the Commonwealth, so he could have a full knighthood.
Sure.
It wasn't about the level of recognition. It was the official recognition through government and etc. And I think the point you make there is he's so retiring, but nobody now, 80 years on, wants to pick up the ball and run with it. And that is sad.
Yeah.
Because whether these guys are with us or not, the word miracle just keeps coming up and coming up. And something needs to be more permanent about that.
Yeah, agreed.
Anyway, I'm going to go. I've said enough. Thank you very
Harry.
much.
Thank you, Harry.
Thank you.
So there's a question or two in the chat, one in particular I'd like to get to, but before we do that, is there anybody in the audience that would like to raise their hand and ask a question or make a comment? Just either do it electronically or just if your video is on, just wave like crazy for a second.
Can I just...
Pat, go ahead.
It's Pat. Just with reference to the previous gentleman, my father was commissioned by Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister, to write at the time a definitive book about Buchenwald. And if I hold it up, I don't know if you can see it. It's called the RAF in Buchenwald, and it's a big fat book, and it's in the limited copies because a lot of this information was confidential in 1993 when he wrote it. But it's available in the Imperial War Museum to researchers and in the RAF Museum at Hendon for researchers. And I'm currently working on an updated version, which will include a lot more archive documents that have since been released. But there is in Britain this definitive book, which took my father most of his retirement to write.
Excellent.
And I also, just one other comment, I'm actually finding that it is the children and the grandchildren of the airmen who are actually showing interest about their father's stories or grandfather's stories. So you've got another generation that is actually beginning to be very interested in what happened in the last few years of the war. And I think that's really worth mentioning, because that the war hasn't gone away for my generation. I think we still live with the effects of it all.
Well, you know, we've done some programming and discussed this idea of, if I get the term right, transgenerational trauma.
Yeah.
You know, and it's very clear that, you know, the children of men who went through such horrific, horrific experiences, those children feel it in various ways themselves, to various degrees.
Mm.
So it's a topic I'd love to delve into more in the future, but
there's a lot of research, and the children in the Holocaust children survivors are called memorial candles, and they carry on talking about the events that affected their families during the Holocaust. And I think that's really quite a nice term.
Yeah. There was a question in the chat by Marcia Wanstreicher. Marcia, are you still with us in the program?
You can take a look. Yes.
Oh, I see her. Okay. I'll get her to unmute. There we go. So, Marcia, this is the question I wanted to pose. Would you want to state it, Marcia, for yourself?
Oh, which one? I made more than one comment. I'm sorry.
Well, I think the fundamental question you asked was of how many did any of the Allied governments ever officially acknowledge that the downed airmen, the 168 airmen of Buchenwald, were in fact, kept at Buchenwald. I know the U.S. government has not, from Rick Martini's book, at least unless they did in the last month or two, which I don't think they did. But do we know, has any Allied government ever recognized what happened? Rick? Do we need to unmute you again?
I was actually curious about the same with the victims at Berga, because they were actually at the POW camps, and then they were moved to Berga. They were in a Stalag Luft. They were in a Stalag, and they were moved to Berga, which is a subcamp of Buchenwald. So, there was a documentary made about that many years ago. And I think the government, the thing with Berga is that they actually worked in Berga. They were POWs, but they actually were forced to do the work, unlike those of the the KLB, who managed to get away with not having to do anything, which I think is absolutely phenomenal.
Any of our experts have any comment?
I can just make one comment, actually, that the officers as POWs were not supposed to work, but the NCOs in the prisoner of war camps did work, and they were used for they were supposed to be used for anything but the production of ammunition.
Except that that's exactly what they were doing in Burka.
Yeah. Yes, but that was in the Geneva Convention.
Yes.
You were not supposed to be making ammunition, but you could do labouring. They used them a lot for the trade to build railways and that sort of thing. But they were not supposed to be involved in any of the V2, V1 projects.
Exceptions to every treaty, I'm sure. Rick, we were going to go to you. The question of recognition by any of the governments that were involved with, I think 5.
Canada after about 2000 did a recognition of the surviving airmen. And New Zealand, as Mike mentioned, there was a flurry about Phil Lamison after the video was released. But in terms of official recognition, I guess the UK, and as Pat was talking about, they have acknowledged. But in the period between the end of the war and the 1990s, there was nobody gave official recognition to these men. And in fact, for the American airmen, they had to sign security agreements, and sometimes their families had to sign security agreements that they wouldn't talk about what they'd been through without official permission.
And why? What was the reasoning? Was it ever explained?
The two working proposals have been the one that I outlined in Betrayed, which was part of the bring all the German specialists to the U.S. And have them do work for the U.S. government. And the other was to avoid opening a can of worms about the presence of U.S. and allied military personnel, not just airmen, in concentration camps and death camps, because some of the forced laborers were working in facilities that had ties to multinational corporations who were still generating profits to shareholders during the war. And that, so both, and both could be true at once, but whatever it was sufficient to not only keep them from being recognized for 40 years, but also keep the US government from even acknowledging their existence in the 1990s through congressional recognition, which got defeated twice in the Senate Judiciary Committee.
There was also recruitment of a lot of the counterintelligence officers into British intelligence. So a lot of the Sicherheitsdienst were recruited deliberately for their knowledge of the Soviet spies and what was going on in the Soviet Union. So we were, unfortunately, recruiting people to work in MI6 as consultants at the same time when my father was working in Germany. And it was a known fact that we were using German intelligence to counter the Soviet intelligence activities.
Well, whatever the reasoning, it's illogical to me. It's a shame that all these men went through this horrific experience, suffered what they did, and then had to suffer further as their lives progress. So
I have to say that when we did the world premiere screening up in Bellingham or Mount Vernon, Washington, and Joe was there, and I can't remember what other airman made it down for that, but we walked all up on stage when the movie was over, and the very first comment from the audience was, they told Joe, "We believe you now."
wow.
And that was just a very, very powerful moment, that he got that vindication after being told that he was lying and making it up by, his own neighbors, basically. So yeah, it's the power of film. Yeah.
Yep. And Mike, you did these men and our country, their countries, a wonderful service by producing this and putting it out there. And we want to thank you for that. Hope that you continue in the same vein with other treasures you might run across.
Thank you. Yes, hopefully.
Sean, is there anything else in that we should address? I think we may have set a BBC record for being on as late as 9:40 Eastern time, which well past my normal bedtime.
Mm-hmm.
Not unless anybody else here would like to chime in. I know we have few videos on, so I can see you if you want to chime in. A couple things, continuing in the chat, but unless you, Michelle Moscato said, "Would you answer my original question, Michelle?" Let me ask you to unmute. If you could remind us what that question is, we may have missed it in the chat.
I did. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Let's see here.
Mute.
Can
There
I-
you go.
There we go.
There I go.
Okay, we can hear
I'm
you.
on mute. Yeah,
Thank you.
I was wondering how is this going to be available to the public? And if so, when and how? And I mean,
Yeah,
I think this is wonderful, and I feel privileged to be able to have watched this with all of you. But I would love to see this more widely available.
Yes, thank you for asking. It is out there. Usually if you search, stream Lost Airmen of Buchenwald, if you Google that, a lot of times it'll come up. I think it might be on Amazon, it might be on iTunes. The trick is there's old versions of the film out there, and the difference you can tell is the old poster is kind of this tan, kind of beige color, and the new poster is gray with the plane crashing over the fence line there. And when you see that poster, that's the new version. And I think it is on some of the streaming on some of the websites out there, like Amazon and iTunes.
Mike, it's on YouTube in the UK. You can buy
there
it.
you go.
£5.99.
So you might be able to do the same in the US YouTube then. It's hard for me to keep track of where things are because they're constantly falling off and then popping up in different places. But
This would be a great submission for all of the film festivals across the United States.
yeah, when it first came out in 2012, we did do a festival run, and it was in, where was it? One at the GI Film Festival. It was in the Fort Lauderdale Film Festival. It may have aired at the St. Louis International Film Festival. So it did the run, but they're very hard to get into festivals because they get so many submissions. So, but it did a little bit of it, and then mainly I would just like to see it more widely distributed for people to be able to find it online. That's always,
that would be wonderful.
especially when a film has been out for as long as this one has been, it gets harder and harder to find it. But yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very
What
much.
about Mike? What about physical releases? Barry asked in the chat.
I think you can get the DVD on Amazon. I'm almost positive. But again, look for the kind of grayish, misty poster version of it, not the tan old version of it. If you want this version that you just watched, yeah.
That means I got to go find my DVD player, Mike.
Yeah.
I know.
But I know where it is. It's right next to my.
I
it's
think you can.
my
I think you can purchase it, like the digital copy of it, on like maybe on the iTunes or Amazon, so that you own at least own a digital download of it. Yeah.
But I know where it is. It's right next to my 8-track cassette player.
Right.
Got them all stored up.
And the reel to reel. Right. Yes.
Well, listen, I think we ought to bid adieu here for the night. I want to thank Mike Dorsey, of course, for just being here tonight, allowing us to show his film. Marilyn Walton, as always, you're a great asset to a lot of people, including the Veterans Breakfast Club.
Thank you.
Colin Heaton, one of these days I'm going to ask you a question and I'm going to stump you. I don't know what it will be.
It's going to be hard.
I'm going to figure it out. Now, next week we do move to a different venue, and that's the Pacific War, the battle off Samar, with the story of Ziggy Sprague, Admiral Ziggy Sprague. We're having his grandson on, and we're having the official U.S. Navy historian, a man named Admiral Sam Cox, on as well, who's a fan of Ziggy Sprague's. So maybe, Colin, maybe there's something in there I could stump. But Rick and Pat, thank you so very much for contributing tonight. We really appreciate, Pat, especially you. That's yeoman's work, being up so late in the middle of the night. Thank you.
It's been a wonderful experience. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, it's nice to see you, Pat.
Thank you. Cheers.
Okay, Sean, we're done.
Thank you all for being here and for joining in. We'll be back Monday night with more VBC. Hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you.